Thank you, and Lascan Corlia, and I do welcome the opportunity to have time for statements in the House today on the report of retired Judge Gerard Houghton arising from the scoping exercise into the circumstances surrounding the tragic and untimely death of Shane O'Farrell, aged 23, in August 2021 in a hit-and-run incident in a car driven by Zigomantas Gradutskat, the individual referred to in the report as ZG. The sudden loss of Shane at such a young age, with his whole life ahead of him, is a desperate tragedy for all of those who knew him and loved him, and one which will always be an immense source of grief in their lives. And I, like many in the House today, have met with the O'Farrell family, and I know how much they feel his loss every day, and I too want to acknowledge them in the gallery here this afternoon. As deputies are aware, the background to the government's decision to establish the scoping exercise was in response to the desire of these houses for further examination to be conducted into the circumstances of Shane's death. I want to thank Judge Gerard Houghton, who conducted the scoping exercise with diligence, including throughout COVID-19, and all of those who cooperated with this process. The final revised terms of reference for the scoping exercise were finalised in July of 2019 by the then Minister for Justice, Charles Flanagan. The terms of reference required Judge Houghton to advise the Minister for Justice on whether there were any circumstances surrounding the death of Mr O'Farrell which warranted further investigation or inquiry beyond those already carried out. Separately, whether an inquiry was necessary into the systems and procedures for the sharing of information between An Garda Síochána, the court service and other relevant state bodies operating at the time of Shane O'Farrell's death. It was a requirement of the judge that where a further inquiry were recommended, he should also suggest the form of any such investigation or inquiry, provide a draft terms of reference, and then suggest the composition of the investigation or the inquiry. The position of the government was always that Judge Houghton was free to make any recommendation he saw fit, and I, as Minister for Justice, did not direct or certainly was very open to any recommendation that was made in this report. The terms of reference were finalised based on advice from the Attorney-General. Judge Houghton helpfully set out these matters in his report, including publishing both original and revised terms of reference. In terms of the conduct of the scoping exercise, I recognise that the report took almost 3 years to complete. I know this was longer than people would have anticipated. I understand that this was due to the judge's desire to be as comprehensive as possible, and also in part due to the impact that COVID-19 related restrictions had on the judge's ability to engage with all of the necessary parties. When Judge Houghton submitted his final scoping report to me on the 1st of June 2022, I then sought the advice of the Attorney-General about the issue of publication. Subsequently, my colleague Minister Harris brought the final report to a Cabinet meeting on the 25th of April 2023. At that meeting, the Government noted the final report of the scoping exercise before it being laid before the Houses of the Oireachtas and before its publication on the 3rd of July. The O'Farrell family, understandably, have been very prominent and engaged with the scoping exercise, and I sincerely thank them for their engagement. As members are aware, last November, the then Taoiseach Micheál Martin and I met with members of the O'Farrell family regarding the report in terms of both content and indeed its publication. Minister Harris also met with members of the family in May of this year. The Government and I are very mindful of the O'Farrell family and of their loss, and as I said at the very outset, I know how challenging and distressing this has been over the last number of years, and I want to acknowledge that here again publicly and to say how difficult it has been, and I know that, and I want to acknowledge that. It's clear from reading the report that Judge Houghton carried out a very thorough review of all relevant material and has produced a robust and a measured report. The 416-page report is comprehensive. It sets out all of the issues within the terms of reference in some detail. I understand that, having fully engaged with each issue raised, Judge Houghton concludes that no further investigation or inquiry is warranted beyond those that are already carried out. The report gives attention to the circumstances of the tragic incident itself and sets out the elements which contributed. In setting out the circumstances, he has been forthright in his view that there were a variety of factors which contributed to the incident. The judge further finds that there are no circumstances in the context of granting, objecting, revoking of bail or the monitoring of compliance with conditions of bail which warrant further inquiry. He makes a similar finding about the systems and procedures for the sharing of information between An Garda Síochána, the court service and other relevant state bodies operating at the time of Shane O'Farrell's death. Judge Houghton makes several recommendations regarding bail, suspended sentences legislation, amendments to the Road Traffic Act, and in relation to notices of appeals administered by the court service. For example, the report acknowledges that new legislation has already been introduced in respect of both bail and suspended sentences. The Department will complete an initial examination of legislation in this area shortly as part of its continuous review of the criminal law to identify whether any further legislation or amendment is required about suspended sentences and/or bail. My officials are also engaging with stakeholders on the procedural matters raised by the judge to see how they might be progressed. While the state's bail laws do provide for the refusal of bail in certain circumstances, the presiding judge is entirely independent in the exercise of their judicial functions, and the decision to grant bail in a particular case is solely a matter for the judge. An Garda Síochána advises me that the state's amended bail laws have proven to be effective, and all legislative provisions are of course kept under review. The Government also today agreed to progress the recommendation in regard to charges of careless driving in the forthcoming road traffic bill, and that was just this morning. It would of course have been open to Judge Houghton to have recommended a tribunal of inquiry, a commission of investigation, or an inquiry under section 42 of the Garda Síochána Act if he had found that such an inquiry were warranted, and that was very much open to him. There has been a criminal trial, a coroner's court, the independent review mechanism, a GSOC investigation, and the Houghton scoping exercise concerning the tragic death of Shane O'Farrell. The independent report by Judge Houghton does not provide a basis for the Government to establish an independent inquiry. I want to turn maybe just to a couple of issues that have been raised in the House in recent weeks. The first concerns that a file was held within the Garda National Crime and Security Intelligence Services regarding Žygimantas Gwiduška. I note that Judge Houghton deals with this in his report, and he concludes that he was entirely satisfied with the cooperation he received from An Garda Síochána in regard to this. The second concerns the return of an exclusion order regarding Žygimantas Gwiduška, which was imposed in 2013 and expired earlier this year. I have spoken to Shane's family on this matter in recent weeks, and I undertook to engage with An Garda Síochána. To date, An Garda Síochána have not located the whereabouts of this individual. If his whereabouts become known, I will of course examine this issue again. In such instances, there's a very clear process which must be followed. In order to make a further exclusion order, the person in question must be notified of the Minister's intention to make the exclusion order, and they must be given an opportunity to make representation to the Minister in this regard. But as I have said, I will commit to examining this again if the whereabouts of this individual become known. Again, Cathaoirleach, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on the matter this evening. I do recognise that this outcome in the report is not what Shane's family and those who speak in support of them will want, and I do regret that this is where we find ourselves today. I can commit that the Department of Justice, other government departments and state bodies will continue to focus on implementing the technical and the procedural recommendations set out by Judge Houghton in this report.
Thank you, Orla.